Welcome to Daily Life Connection as we continue to explore who God is and what difference that makes in our lives and in our relationship with Him. We've been in Luke chapter 24 and talking about the story on the road to Emmaus and how it reveals who God is. I want to go there again today. And we remember that at the end of the story, he's in their house and he's sharing a meal with them. And as he breaks the bread, their eyes are opened. It's Jesus. He's really alive, and he's here with us. I want to share about the God of the meal. All through Scripture, God has chosen to reveal himself through food. Have you ever thought about that? The God of the meal. I mean, when you go right back to the very earliest days of Scripture, and we find God revealing himself through meals. The Passover meal in Exodus, God reveals his life-preserving power and his deliverance through eating roasted goat that's been sacrificed. The Passover meal, which became central to Israel's faith and still is today, thousands of years later. God, the God of the meal. I'm not going to take time, but over and over again in Old Testament Scripture, we find God revealed in provisions of meals, whether it's Elijah on the mountain and being fed by the ravens or whatever it may be, all down through history. And then we come, of course, to the New Testament and the Passover meal when Jesus, using real bread and real wine, says, "This is my body and my blood." And all of a sudden, at that moment, something monumental shifted. When God went from Old Covenant to New Covenant, a monumental shift, a seismic shift in his relationship with people. He didn't do it through a sermon. He did it through a meal, at a meal, with a meal. This bread, this cup, this wine. He did it that way. And here in this story, he spends at least a couple of hours teaching Scripture to them, but they don't get it. But it's when he breaks bread with them. It's in the breaking of the bread. Their eyes are opened and they recognize him. I just find that so fascinating. And then, of course, we go to the book of Acts, and it says they were devoted to the fellowship and to the breaking of bread. We understand the teaching, the preaching the word. We understand prayer. Those are really spiritual activities. But they were devoted to the breaking of bread. They were devoted to eating together. And most likely it's referring to the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper. They were devoted to that. Why were they devoted to that? Because for some reason God has chosen to reveal who he is and to bring relationship to people and encounter and revelation to people through meal, through bread, through wine, through eating together. We find that in the New Testament church, they ate together. They had common meals all the time. And so it is down through history. And it's so interesting because in our Bible study group that I'm part of on Tuesday nights, we often say, there's no need for any snacks. We don't need any snacks. And over the years, I'm talking 25 years, always food makes its way back into the group. And it can be very simple, like a tray of fruit or whatever, or it might be some wonderful Tim Hortons donuts or whatever it may be. But for some reason, God has ordained it that he is a God who I'm not saying he reveals himself in donuts, don't get me wrong, but I am saying somehow this God is tied to eating together. That eating together is not just a sign of fellowship, it is a means of fellowship. John Wesley said it about the bread and the wine and communion. It is a means of grace. I don't understand how that works. But there is something sacramental about eating together and God revealing himself around meals. So, It's a, well, it's sort of a strange way that God reveals himself, the God of the food. But I mean, when you go through the Psalms, they are filled with grain and wine and oil and feasting and look at what, and even in the Old Covenant, look at what God did. You know, he instituted feast after feast after feast after feast during the year. And it was in those times that Israel really connected with and related to God himself. So I don't really understand what all that means. I like it. I like eating. I like fellowshipping together with people. And I just want to encourage us that when we do eat together with other people, maybe just a cup of coffee and a donut at Tim's, sharing around a table, or maybe it's an elaborate Thanksgiving meal, whatever it may be, I just encourage us to invite God to reveal himself to us in the meal times, because he is a God who has chosen to do that over and over again. And, you know, it's interesting in the Passover passage, when Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, he said, I'm not going to eat or drink of the or wine again until I eat it with you again in the kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom of heaven coming at the end of time is described as a feast, as a banquet. Once again, God's going to reveal himself to us and show himself to us and relate to us and enjoy our company around a banquet. I like that kind of God. He is the God of the meal. Well, let's think about that today. If you have some ideas, if that rings a bell with you somehow, just leave some comments or send me an email, whatever. I always enjoy hearing what God is stirring in your heart as we explore who God is together. We'll talk